Okay, today we are talking about the force velocity profile of any athletic movement. So this is just a general graph, not representing anything specifically. Later on in this video, I'm going to show you some graphs that we've taken with climbers on their fingers, both to document this and a more practical application since we're talking about rock climbing training. And the primary goal of this video is to talk about types of strength and to make sure that everyone can differentiate between strength and power. Because there's really not that much of a difference, but it's really confusing for people when they go to the gym and they're trying to target becoming more powerful and they think there's only one type of tool that they can use to generate power or have a general idea what the difference is between power and strength. I have a lot of people that I talk to and consult with that are very confused by this terminology. So that's the reason of shooting this video. So, strength versus power, what is it? Give you a second to think about it. Most people will say time or velocity and that's exactly it, right? So that's the only difference. So we can, instead of using power, and this is what I suggest my participants that come to my course do, is just stop using that term and use high-speed strength. Right? And there's a little bit of nuance, and that's not entirely true, but that's a better way to think about it for the average athlete. Is we want to target strength, which we're going to cover here, which is generally very slow and requires low velocity for very specific reasons in terms of their time to recruit muscle fibers. But when we're talking about things that are more powerful, we're just referring to high-speed strength. It's really nothing more than the actual time at which a researcher defines as the cutoff point for power. And with the other RFD paper, it suggests specific time frames for researchers to use up to 200 milliseconds, which is incredibly fast. So way more fast than any individual athlete could measure at their facility or in the gym when they're training. So instead of thinking about power as like this concept that's so confusing, think about training high-speed strength. Then each of the exercises that you do for strength can also be power exercises. Something as simple as a deadlift. People think, I'm strength training, I'm doing a deadlift, I'm doing weighted pull-ups, I'm doing a squat, I'm doing a bench press. Those are strength training exercises. I'm hanging onto a hangboard, pulling as hard as I can. People consider those only strength training tools. So in order to make them power training tools or high-speed strength tools, all we have to do is increase the intent and increase the speed. So that's what this graph is going to demonstrate for us, okay? So a simple force time graph. So on this axis we have force, and over here on the x-axis we have time. So as we can see from this general curve, don't get freaked out by all that I'm drawing, by this general curve here, we're seeing that things that are of high force, like this number 5, require more time, right? It's as simple as that. So if we're referring to things that are of high speed strength that are considered powerful, those happen here because the time frame is much shorter, right? We don't give the body enough time to allow the muscle fibers to generate enough force for maximum strength here, which is number 5. Okay, so let's go through each one of these. So this right here, underneath the graph on the x-axis, we have iso, right, which is referring to the isometric muscle contraction. Every time we perform a dynamic movement, regardless of what it is, we have to generate that isometric force. At least enough torque to overcome the acceleration of lifting whatever object it is off the ground or your body weight and start to initiate the movement, okay? So that's the isometric phase. And then we have the dynamic phase, which is the actual isotonic movement going through a range of motion. So we look at the force time curve here. Number 1 is going to be considered your starting strength, right? The starting strength is your isometric muscle strength. That's why specifically targeting an isometric movement and isometric strength training can be really productive for improving someone's velocity and improve their high-speed strength and thus their power output. Number 2, acceleration strength. So as soon as we get enough impulse to overcome inertia, now we have to start accelerating the implement of the movement with the movement, whatever we're doing. Number 3 is RFD, so this is my rate of force development. So these things kind of run into each other, and you don't need to differentiate between those, obviously. But if we were going to measure something for high-speed strength over time, this should get steeper, right? And I'll show some examples on the end of this video with some graphs that we've done on athletes so we can get a better differentiation perspective. Number 4, explosive strength. So notice here explosive strength, but notice how this goes off the graph right here. It goes up into space. So that's when we talk about doing explosive types of training. We can't stop the movement, right? Because notice how the graph here has this curve and then it goes back down for time, right? So maximum strength is here. But in order to be explosive, we can't slow down the movement. So in order to be maximally explosive, that's like using a campus board if you're using both arms. We're going as high as we can versus using a pull-up for velocity or for speed strength. We have to, at the top, we have to slow down. And that actually affects this number 4, this explosive strength component, because it requires the nervous system to actually slow down, right? So we actually don't train to be optimally fast with high-speed strength if we're not doing explosive movements, okay? So number 5 is going to be your maximum strength output. So notice how it takes time to peak up here, but with this movement, if we're testing maximum strength, we always have to have the deceleration phase and lower down to implement whatever we're doing. And then number 6 over here, we have the strength endurance continuum. So if we're training for, a longer duration at maximum strength, then we would hit this peak 5 here and we would continue on extended period of times. That's how we get strength endurance, which also is time dependent, right? It's very slow, very low speed strength. And then last but not least, number 7, your deceleration strength. So deceleration strength we can train individually as well, and we'll talk another video about that when we talk about the whole full isotonic movements and go through the triphasic type of training method, okay? So hopefully this gives you a general idea of the force time curve and a better understanding, a basic understanding of the difference between low speed strength and high speed strength. Now I'm going to pull up another graph where we're going to switch it, so I'll make sure I explain it so it's not confusing and give some specific exercise examples that we can apply to rock climbing. Okay, we're going to use this graph to talk about types of strength, and credit mostly goes to Verkhoshansky for this. Track and field strength conditioning coach, really well cited and researched, as well as promoted in the strength conditioning community. First thing I want to mention though before I talk about this graph is I'm colorblind, and so I will try and use black, blue, and red, and I will mostly use those colors. I have no idea what color that is. Those colors, no idea. I know that they're not black, blue, or red. My kids think this is really funny, and that's why they got all their Christmas presents taken back. So, they'll have to learn that part of it. Okay, so we're talking about types of strength. With the previous graph, we showed that it's not just, there's different types, right? The difference between strength and power is just the speed, right? The velocity, the movement, the intent at which you actually move something, right? So here we're going to break it down even to more pieces, right? So at the top of this graph, this is the force axis over here, and then we have the velocity component down here. So this refers to how fast something is going to move. Things that are on this end are going to be moving at a very high velocity. So let me make sure I write that. High velocity, this is low velocity, this is low force, and this is high force. Okay? So up here on the top, we'll just go kind of in this direction here. We have maximum strength. And so over on the right-hand side, I'm giving us an example, and we're going to use an example that's really common for rock climbing, which is a pull-up, right? We do this very commonly. So maximum strength training, we have high force, low velocity, because it takes a while, right? It takes a good long time if we have weight onto our body to do a pull-up, because we have to get all the muscles and all of that movement pattern recruited in order to actually perform the movement. So this would look like, the exercise example would be a maximum weighted pull-up. So I gave this set rep scheme over here that I would suggest someone use. Depends on the coach and the athlete, obviously, but this would be a 5x1. So you would do 5 sets of literally 1 repetition. And these ones you would want separated, then you would want to take your interset rest, 30 to 60 seconds, 60 seconds to 120 seconds, before you do your second set of 1 repetition, pulling maximum weight, right, with very low velocity. The second type of strength is strength speed. So notice here how it's kind of a mix, right? It's part strength and part speed. So the velocity is going to be different. So is the force going to be different. Therefore, we need to adjust the load appropriately to target this component, the strength speed component. The fact that strength comes first, though, means that strength is still the priority with this exercise. So we're going to use the exact same exercise. We're going to use the pull-up, and we're going to do a pull-up at 60 to 80% of someone's 1 repetition max. And then we would also suggest changing the set repetition scheme. So here we can do the same 5 sets. We're going to do 3 repetitions though. But now we're going to make sure that we're using a lower load because we're going to be doing more repetitions, right? To target specifically that continuum of our strength training continuum, okay? Third one is speed strength. So notice how speed is the focus now. Now we're moving things with more velocity. Now we're really focusing on, well, I want to say in general, we should focus on moving with as much velocity as we can all of the time, but quite literally, we won't be moving with a lot of velocity here or here, but we should still be trying to. When it gets to the speed strength component, we will be noticing moving with more velocity, right? This is when measuring things can be really valuable in terms of the velocity of the movement. But here, if we use our same exact example, we would be doing a body weight pull-up. If we wanted to do 5 sets, we would do 5 by 5. We can do more volume now because we have less load. We can increase the velocity, but 5 by 5, I would suggest doing cluster sets where you do 1 rep as fast as you can, rest 5 to 10 seconds, do another rep as fast as you can, rest 5 to 10 seconds, etc. for your full 5 reps, and then maybe take a longer rest, and then pick it up and do that same exercise again. So that is a speed-focused exercise, but it's still strength because it's still slowing the movement down, right? The one thing that I didn't draw here because I had no colors and I wasn't sure what to do was if I was going to draw a line right here, these ones up here all require the deceleration. So you have to slow down the movement for all of these. Maximum strength, speed strength, strength, speed, and speed strength. You have to slow them down and stop. These ones down here are considered the ballistic type, right? We don't want to slow them down. We don't want to actually inhibit our muscles from, having to stop, or we don't want to create our muscles to have them stop, okay? So on this one, speed strength, body weight pull-up. Moving down to the next level, ballistics and plyometrics. Now we're talking about things that are very fast, right? So with ballistics and plyometrics, if we saw from the previous graph, we don't want to slow down the movement. This is one that should continue, right? This would be a jump, right? Instead of actually doing a deadlift for speed. So if we're talking about ballistics or plyometrics, we don't want to slow down the movement. This is when we would use, if we're using our pull-up example, we would do a campus slap test, where you're just going to pull up with a bar or a large rung on a campus board, slap something that's really high, and then land on the ground. Or campus board is what a campus board is made for, right? Campus boards or types of campus boards with like a 30-degree kickback with bars are really good for doing this type of work because the goal is to concentrically pull up as fast as we can and then hit something else that's very high without having to stop with our chest close to the bar. So there's a couple different variations you could do here. So here you would want to do for speed. So I didn't write the set rep scheme down here. So if we did the same 5 sets of this, you would do very similar to doing this, except you would do more. So you could do 10 by 1, or 20 by 1, each with good rest between there, because the goal with this is to really focus on being as fast as possible, okay? And then the very last one is sprinting. So this goes, and this obviously is a track and field example, right? So go from maximum strength all the way down to sprinting. So now there's no stopping, no deceleration. And in this case, we would use something like a rope trainer, where you have the endless rope and you're just pulling as fast as you can, sprinting through the movement as quickly as you can. Or the other option you could do is you could do some super maximal velocity training, where you would actually, this becomes a little annoying, where you would use a pull-up bar or a campus slap test or a campus board and actually rig something so you actually take weight off your body. Or use something like a speed climbing wall and actually add more force to how much it pulls you up so you could work on moving as fast as physically possible, okay? So here's a better understanding of strength and how it gets confused, because you say power, where's power in this graph? Power is somewhere in here, like somewhere in the middle range right here is where optimal sports performance happens. And that's a really important concept to understand. We can't just train this because we're going to move really slow, and we can't train this because we're not going to produce a lot of force. So we want to have this full continuum of types of not really different interventions, but understanding of how we would use different either strengths and velocities or speeds to actually perform our work and target very specifically with our athletes. So now I'm going to pull up some graphs to show you how I measure. We're going to talk about finger force specifically because we measure more finger force than I do vertical bar pulling speed as those examples. Okay, so I've decided that before doing the graphing stuff and also before I get a bunch of messages and DMs about examples for the fingers, because I know after the pull-up example everyone's like, how do I do all that with my fingers? Here's an example of how you would do it with your fingers. So I got rid of the graph and all the confusing colors. Top here is maximum strength, so here is high force, see, and here is low force. Right, and remember these have an inverse relationship with velocity, so velocity is going to be low over here, low velocity, and here is high velocity. Okay, so maximum strength, this would look like an overcoming isometric. So use a portable tool, use your hangboard. Some of you will be strong enough where using your hangboard won't be enough. Well, you have to put weight on your body or hold something else so you don't lift yourself off the ground. But this will be a pull as hard as you possibly can with a very specific finger position on a specific edge size chosen for you because it's specific for you, or your coach chose it for you. This one would look something like, same like we did with the pull-up, you would do 5 sets at 1 rep, and you would do, I want to do 5 sets, 1 rep at 3 to 5 seconds, right? And the 3 to 5 second time frame is make the time that you're actually doing the contraction long to make sure you're optimizing that recruitment, right? Because the velocity needs to be very low in order to hit this maximum strength component, okay? Number 2, strength speed. Now we're going to be talking about doing a normal weighted hangboard routine, right? If we're going to do our same 5 sets, to keep the example simple, 5 by, you could do 3 at 10 seconds, right? That would be your 5 by 3, 10-second hang. So here we're having a longer hang time, right? So the velocity is going to change, but it's all about the actual speed of the contraction. So here it's going to take longer for me to get more force to hit that peak force, where here I'm going to hit the peak force of whatever load this is faster, right? Even though I'm hanging on longer, right? So if the 10-second thing is confusing you, do 5 by 3 at 5 seconds, right? So the exact same time frame here, the upper limit of this one, we're going to do 5 seconds here. And it really is not about, it's really because this is going to be less load. Let's say this one is 80 to 90%, where this one is 100%, right? So the fact that we're using less load here with the isometric, we're going to hit that peak force that we're producing faster, right? Which gives us this strength focus, but it still has a speed component, okay? Number 3, speed strength. So now we're starting to focus and transition towards really thinking about being fast. And this is where campus board would work great. Campus board doubles. So you're going to use body weight. Most of you, some people add weight to their body when they do campus board. Body weight doubles. So doubles means that we're still like working on speed, but there's still a strength component because doubles are pretty hard. And if doubles with your feet on, maybe would be another variation to actually increase the speed a little bit. Instead of having your body hanging, put your feet on and do doubles. That would be a way to target the more speed component. And this one, if we're going to do doubles, we would do something similar. You'd do 5 sets of 5 reps, and I would probably cluster those with 10 to 20 seconds between. Okay, so then we're now focusing on the speed component. Ballistics and plyometrics. So this is going to be the one where we don't want to slow down, right? We don't want the movement to slow down. Training the fingers is kind of tricky because the muscle contractions are all isometric, so it's harder to visualize slowing down. But when we talk about ballistics and plyometrics, I would probably do campus board singles. So now we're doing reach as far and fast as you can, because with a double you have to get your whole body weight off to the next rung, so you still have to pull more force to lift both hands off. Where when we're doing singles, we still have a lower arm pulling, so we can generate more force with that 4-range of motion, so it should be a little bit faster, okay? So campus board singles, you could do something here, you could do 5 by 7. I would still suggest clustering those sets with 10 to 20 seconds between. Same thing, you could do 5 sets, 7 repetitions, cluster them together. And then the last one, the most fast, or the increased velocity component could be the sprinting side, could be the velocity pulls. Like on a hangboard, you could do this on a campus board, you could do it with your feet on. And this would essentially look like, if you've seen those videos, would be you standing on the ground and just popping into a hangboard as fast as you possibly can. Or with your feet on a campus board on, and then jumping up really fast, not moving to the next rung, just like quickly impulsing into it. That would be the highest velocity component for training your fingers, okay? So go ahead and think about those. This 5-set thing is kind of just like the number that I chose that we used for the previous example. Maybe doing 5 sets of 7 reps of a campus board routine might be a lot for your fingers. So if you're a new athlete, don't jump right into doing 5 sets of 7 reps of double campusing. That's probably too much to load for you. So keep this in context, right? Don't take this and say, great, I'm gonna start doing this today because I'm super psyched about it. So now we're gonna look at the graphs. Okay, here are the graphing examples that we're gonna use. Just so you know, these are 3 separate tests that I use on my clients and that my assessing coaches use on their clients, but I put them all on one graph just to make the representation be a little more obvious. But note that these generally would be in separate graphs with their own particular specifications, but it's important to put them all together so you can see the huge difference. So over here on the left-hand side, we have on the y-axis, we have force in pounds, and on the x-axis, we have time in seconds. On the RFD graphs, on the other slide, this is usually shown in milliseconds, because in terms of like a researcher or a coach, they define what power really is, right? Because we already talked about power is just high-speed strength. So in this instance, we cut the time off in like 500 milliseconds, right? Or in this one, this is 200 milliseconds probably. So I cut off the actual time that I'm interested in looking at. So I'm not really worried about what's going on over here after this 200 millisecond time frame, right? That's how power and high-speed strength can get confusing, because power is really just the definition of when the actual researcher or the coach cuts the force production off. If we look at this red graph here, this is the 10-second test. So you can see here on the yellow and the red, the force production comes on much more slowly, because this is what it takes in terms of time for recruitment to happen until, in this instance, the yellow line here is their peak force production. In the red, this test was performed after, and you can see they're pretty close, but the goal was to sustain the muscle contraction for a long time. So we hit a little bit less force with this one, but we're interested in a different metric. We're interested in how much of that force production can he produce for an entire 10 seconds. Okay, so I'll maybe click through and show you some different graphs and show up close, but that's the big picture that you want to think about. If we're training contact strength, we're training using velocity pulls, we're training using a campus board, we're training using limit bouldering as your intervention, whether it's a sport climber or boulderer, this peak should go up, right? We should be producing more force in the same amount of time after a training phase if the focus is rate of force development. Yellow graph right here, if we're interested in ultimate strength and maximum force production, we care about this number getting higher. Time frame is not that big of a deal. Most athletes hit that within 1.5 seconds, at least I've seen on the fingers, but we're not really worried about the time. I want the number to be greater. With the 10-second effort, then we talk about different metrics. We're worried more about what percentage of this particular number can they sustain for an extended period of time, to define how we would train their fingers specifically on a fingerboard in terms of the time under tension, to be very specific with it, but I'll shoot another video on that. But this is the type of information that we would use for the fingers on a rock climbing athlete that goes through the different types of strength, right? So yellow would be maximum strength. This would be strength endurance. And then over here, this would be velocity, or this would be speed strength. Still a strength component, but a very important to note that it's a speed focus, right? Probably not a ballistic thing, because we're actually stopping the movement and it's not actually displacing his body in this particular instance, okay? So ask me any questions that you have down below. Make sure you share this video. I'm trying to grow this channel with other climbers or climbing coaches that'll be interested. And then check out my course page for courses coming up.